good to go.
So good afternoon. First and foremost, I want to thank you for joining us this afternoon to discuss this, very important place and time that we're in as a school district and as a community and as a world, really. I want to address a couple of things on the front end, just as we kind of go through today. First of all, when we first rolled this out, I was hoping to keep the number small enough that we could kind of have some dialogue with our parents. One of the really important pieces of this kind of moment in time is it's an opportunity for us to hear from parents on, how what we're doing impacts them and their thoughts about reopening. So having said that, we did expand the groups. Today, we will kind of take you through or walk you through a presentation.
This doesn't work.
Talking a little bit about where we have been, where we are today, and then kind of next steps. As we're talking today, Mr. Doherty will have your microphones muted, but we'd ask that you type any questions that you have along the way into the chat feature. And at the end of the presentation, I'll have Mike and Jen just help me kind of go through that list and answer those questions. And then if we have some time at the end, we'll open it up to the group to ask any additional or clarifying questions that you might have. So you will be muted during the presentation, and then we'll kind of unmute you at the end. If and when we get to that open session with as many people as we're scheduled to have in the meeting, so everyone's not talking over each other, we would ask you to raise your hand, and that technology is way above my head. So Mr. Doherty, if you could explain how people raise their hands so we get to that portion of the meeting.
Sure. You'll find that hand raise button inside of your participant window. Just click the little button that says raise hand, and I will be notified, and so will Ms. Benko. And when the time is right, we'll go ahead and call on you. If your question is answered before that, there's a button that says lower hand. Go ahead and click that too. That way we know that your question's been answered.
So it was suggested after our first community forum, this is number 2, that I give Mr. Doherty and Mrs. Benko just a brief opportunity to introduce themselves, talk about their roles in the district. I will cover the first half of this presentation. They'll cover the work when it gets specific to buildings and kind of help me balance in answering questions. So Mike, why don't you introduce yourself and talk a little bit about your role in the district?
Sure. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Mike Doherty. I'm the Director of Technology and Innovation here at Sugar & Falls. My role with this plan is obviously the technology side, kind of how that's all going to come together, especially when we talk about live streaming classrooms and going remote. But I've also spent a lot of time with Mrs. Benko just going through kind of the construction of this plan. We've looked at a ton of different things, 30, 40 different iterations of these plans. So I've spent a lot of time working on that as well.
Ms. Benko?
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jen Benko, and I am the Director of People Services for the district. In my role, I oversee all of the services provided to students, including special education services, intervention services. And my role in working on this opening plan is really to ensure that we are meeting not only the academic needs of students, but also the social emotional needs of students as we move forward.
Okay, thank you. So we're going to go ahead and get going with the presentation so we can certainly get to your questions as well. Obviously, this is the second of 3 community forums we're going to have, and we're going to continue to utilize these vehicles to communicate with our parents throughout the next month or so. I'll talk a little bit about the guidance and the timing, the guidance, and how that's played out for our ability to plan the reopening here in a little bit. But I will tell you that it's been frustrating to not have very clear guidance from the state level for us to operate under. And I felt like it was really important that we at least update our parents and share with them kind of where we're currently at. But I do need to preface on the front end, this is more of a beginning than an end. The model that we implement will likely look much different than what's shared with you today, as we kind of learn more about best practices and the guidance from the state level, and we continue to talk to our partners in the medical field. So please know, I made the decision I felt like we were just quiet too long, and we needed to start the conversation. So this is an opportunity to start the conversation and let you know where we stand today, which will likely change. So obviously we've got issues facing the district currently. The most obvious issue is the COVID-19 pandemic, and our return and reopening to school. And the majority of our time will be spent on that. But I think it's also important to put into context some of the ancillary implications of COVID-19 on our school district. Obviously, this has had a significant impact on the economy, both nationally, globally, and within our community. And with that, the governor made a decision to cut school foundation formula payments, or foundation formula, to recoup some of the funds that the state lost due to the economic downturn. The original number was about $534,000 in cuts that we had to take on this school year. So we went through a variety of cost saving measures to help offset some of that. We were able to work with Senator Dolan, who got an amendment in House Bill 164 that just recently was signed by the governor that did minimize the impact of that cut to around $150,000 for our district for this year. However, it's been clearly stated to public schools that state funding will likely take a hit coming into next year. So we're kind of bracing for that as well. The other economic side of this is we were preparing to bring forward to our community a 7.9 mil operating levy in November of next year. That would have been, in 2017, we passed a bond and operating issue, told the community that could last 3 years. That would be, a little beyond 3 years. And we were prepared to do that. In working with the board, we felt it was too premature, or it was not the right time to come forward with the economic downturn for our community for that ask. It was the ask that was needed at the time before any cuts were even in consideration. But we realized with all of the changes going on, we have to be, aware of what our community is dealing with. So we're balancing those financial issues as we prepare for COVID and return, with the additional costs that will come with that, the PPE, lowering class sizes, cleaning and sanitation. So that's just a kind of an idea of the layers to some of what we're dealing with right now as a school district. And probably the best scenario I could come up with, and I shared this with the Board of Education, if you happen to watch that meeting, was the analogy around Apollo 13. And in that they got stuck in outer space. They eventually had to figure out how to put a square peg through a round hole to get back in safely. And I feel a little bit like that with our return. There's a lot of unknowns. Information is changing daily, and we lack very clear guidance. But we do know some things, and I'll talk a little bit about that kind of as we go through the presentation. So this is obviously a very complex problem that impacts individuals differently. So I have every opinion that could be out there has been shared with me. Everything from you should be completely remote in the fall, don't even bring students back, to come back all in with no restrictions. So there's a lot of opinions, and we're really just trying to focus on data and the best information that we possibly can as we kind of try to solve this complex problem. So there's 3 buckets we talk about. We talk about the public health, we talk about educational, and then obviously you all as community members are an important part of our consideration. So what we've heard from public health, actually was on a call yesterday with a doc from the Cleveland Clinic. He updated me on research that essentially says that for every 3 feet you have in separation, you minimize the likelihood of transmission of COVID-19 50%. So obviously, 6 feet is better than 3 feet, 9 feet is better than 6 feet, and so on. So original considerations or information that was released to us was that we were going to have to practice 6 feet of social distancing. that we would be wearing cloth face coverings, that we would have to minimize transitions, obviously, and keep large cohorts of students apart, and then providing alternative ways of serving lunch, because obviously you can't bring kids together. The model that we're going to share with you today is based on the original draft guidance that was released by the state around last week of May, first week in June. And I would say that it was the most stringent of requirements and restrictions. And I think it meets the 6 feet social distancing requirement. We'll talk about where we're hearing now and what the information is and how that may impact this as we go on. But please know we developed this under those constraints. And obviously those may change, and which would impact the model as we go forward. Some of the educational considerations, we heard from parents that remote learning, everyone stepped up, both parents and staff, and certainly our kids as well. But we needed more face-to-face interaction. The missing piece was that social emotional development. So we made that a real priority to try to get a model that has had as much consistent, regular face-to-face time with students and peers and teachers as possible. Obviously, high quality instruction, and including to continue to offer electives beyond on just the core content or core curriculum. And as I mentioned, we yet to have guidance from the Ohio Department of Education. And then obviously communities, families need to know, and that's really why we started this and didn't just continue to wait until mid-July. Families need to be part of the conversation and understand the parameters or the implications of the things we're dealing with. They need to start to prepare their own lives as well. As you've got a 2 working parent family, there's serious implications for your ability to juggle this. And we feel it necessary to continue to update you along the way so you can balance the things that you need to balance at home as well. And then always, living here and working here, we take great pride in knowing that we have to provide a high quality education. And regardless of the model that we're in, it's important that it's of high quality and what is deserving of our students in Chagrin Falls. I think, as we kind of go through some of this, it's important to know that the model we create even in July will likely change before August. And there is a high likelihood that we're going to have to pivot into a different model during the school year. So I want to give you some perspective on what we've been dealing with in terms of guidance and parameters. This is just a brief overview. On May 15th, it was announced that guidance for the reopening of schools would be forthcoming. Around May 22nd, draft guidance was released from the Ohio Department of Education. That included a section on health requirements and a section on education. Some of the higher level things that you may be interested in that guidance document. It mandated 6 feet social distancing at all times, masks on every staff member and student. And the numbers as we ran them came out to about our ability would be able to transport about 24 students on a bus at a time. There were obviously some cleaning and sanitation requirements as well. So that was released as a draft, and it was kind of told to us that we were to give feedback. They would take that feedback in, make whatever modifications necessary, and re-release the document. So on June 1st, we were awaiting the finalized guidance from the state level so we could begin our planning. June 1st through June 22nd, we continued to hear rumblings on different dates of when it was going to be released, including we were all anticipating it today at 2 o'clock. That it would be released. If you happen to watch the governor yesterday, he extended his order regarding schools throughout the remainder of the week, and he said that document would be released on Thursday of this week. So our hope is that by Thursday, we have a finalized document. Obviously, I have in this slide that it would be released today on June 30th, because that's what we believed when we gave this presentation last week. So having said that, we did not just sit back and do nothing in preparation awaiting that document. We've been spending hours and hours looking at a variety of iterations to both educational schedules and our practices internally from a health and sanitation standpoint to prepare for the opening of school. I'm not going to read this to you, but we are working through a complete disinfection and cleaning plan that will be released and shared with our obviously our employees, but we want our parents to be able to see it as well. We've purchased additional equipment to quickly clean and sanitize areas, because we know once a group of students leave a classroom, we have to sanitize before another group can come in. So I'm not going to, again, read these next two slides to you, but I think it's important for our parents to know we are doing everything we possibly can to be prepared from a cleaning and sanitation side, as well as trying to procure the necessary PPE in terms of masks, thermometers, gloves, hand sanitizer, all of those things we have been working on to transition and be ready for the opening of school. And you can see on this list, that's everything from hand sanitizer to moving towards to making sure we have touchless faucets throughout the school district. So we're trying to work through as many of these issues as we can. In a bit, you'll see kind of a picture of shielding that we're going to purchase and put in every classroom. We've purchased polycarbonate to put up in areas where we want to keep a shield between students and teachers and or visitors and in the offices as well. So we're working through all of that planning and preparing our facilities the best we can for the reopening of school. I know for me, there was kind of a moment where I realized I was spending way too much time focused on the things that we do not know. And I think, at that moment, I made the shift and we started to talk about, let's focus on what we do know and let's start our planning from there. So there are some things we do know. We know that school is going to restart in some capacity in August of this year. We know it's likely that COVID-19 will be here and there will not be a vaccine available, and that we live, or at least on the outskirts or portion of our community in Cuyahoga County, which is the number 2, I believe, unless the data has changed in the last couple of days, I haven't looked, but the second highest county in the state of Ohio in terms of cases of COVID-19. Obviously, we need to consider safety precautions and social distancing as we prepare for the opening of school. And we need to be prepared for, and I think really important for our parents to hear today, you need to prepare for a model that needs to be flexible and fluid and could change on a dime. So when we talk about that, that means a model that could be full return, that we bring all students that are able to, from a health standpoint, and or parents okay with returning. We need to be prepared for a full remote learning opportunity. And again, I think we did a great job in the spring with our with our staff and our parents and the work that was done. But we also know that in serving our parents, there are things we needed to prove upon, and we've done some of that work and procured the necessary technology and started to provide professional development for teachers. So that full remote learning opportunity. And then, there's the hybrid model, which is, you can only bring in a certain number of your students due to social distancing requirements. And that is the one that's the most complex as we move through this, and the one we'll spend the most time kind of talking about because I think it has the greatest implication on our parents. So I think every parent today should know, regardless of how we open, we could need to very quickly flip to a full remote model. That is a likelihood we all need to be aware of. So those are the things we know of as of today. What we don't know is we still don't have federal, state, and local guidance. I will tell you, you are starting to see very clear guidance starting to come out of very credible sources that can help inform us. I know the American Academy of Pediatrics released a document late last week that we've been reviewing. It took a little bit of a different look at social distancing, more based on age. So it looks different than in kindergarten and pre-K than it does necessarily in high school. Cleveland Clinic has recently, released a document as well. We're going through all of that and doing our best to let it inform our planning. We can predict some of the issues that this may cause for our students, staff, and parents. But we need to do a better job, and especially in the next 2 weeks, listening to those groups and letting them give us feedback on how what we're trying to do will impact them. And that's really the purpose of not only this conversation today, but a survey that will be released. And this is ever changing on our community forum last week. I said that we would have guidance on Tuesday when we release the survey first thing Wednesday morning. Obviously, that guidance is not coming until Thursday now. So it'll likely be that we release that right after the 4th of July weekend. I fear releasing it on Friday would be people have kind of tuned out into their 4th of July plans. So that survey is going to be pushed back. But we've spent a lot of time creating that survey, and it will drive a lot of what we're going to do in terms of the next iteration of this model. So those are some things that we don't know. I want to walk you through what we have been doing as a school district, so you're aware of that. Obviously, we conducted 2 surveys during the time that our students were in the virtual environment. That was not only to inform what we were doing kind of as this was going, but also that information informs some of the work in terms of what options we would bring forward. So that was, throughout, March, April, and May. And in May, we brought a core team together to develop a variety of different options. Mike and Jen were really at the forefront of all of that. We didn't want our principals and our teachers worried about focusing on all of the things that go into opening next year in the midst of trying to complete the year of virtual learning. So we wanted to create a variety of models that we could then hand off to what we call building design teams the first week school was out. So the first week school was out, we shared with building design teams that work, and we really kind of allowed them to create and innovate within that on most conversation around the hybrid schedule, like what could that look like, what should that look like, what best meets the needs of students. So that was completed in June. We then decided to share it with our Board of Education at our last meeting, and to conduct these forums to begin to educate our community on what we're thinking. And obviously then, as I mentioned, roll out a survey of next week. And I'm going to say this a variety of times because this may be the most important survey that we've given in a long, long time, because how you respond to those options are going to drive how we open school next year. So let me just give you an example. If we have 5% of our students that choose remote learning, and we have 4-6 feet social distancing requirements, that tells me how many students I can bring into the building safely. If we have 30% of our parents and choose the remote learning, that number looks very different. So again, the more you as parents can help spread the word to make sure everyone fills that out, the better our model would be in terms of implementation. So using the guidelines from that survey, and obviously the guidelines from the state of Ohio, as well as some of these documents that we've received in the last week, will inform our next reiteration of this model, which I would anticipate having done hopefully by the end of July. I would like to have almost a registration for our parents where you formally choose which model you're going to take part in the opening of school at the end of July, so we are ready to go as we go forward. I will put on your radar now, we've had a variety of conversations about our calendar and when to open school. We actually looked at the option of even starting earlier, so we could maybe extend the Thanksgiving to Christmas break, like some colleges and universities are going to do. We didn't think from a procurement of PPE standpoint that was wise. So at our next board meeting, we are going to have a public hearing around an alternative calendar. That doesn't mean we're going to do it. We're going to start the conversation. We obviously need to work with our teachers union as well in this process. But that calendar would give a little more time on the front end to finalize the model, work with staff, and maybe slowly bring students in rather than just open it all at once for our students. So more information would be forthcoming on calendar. So before we started the work of designing any possible model, we had conversation about, okay, what should be our guiding principles for this work? What are kind of our core beliefs that we want to use drive decisions that we make? And obviously the first is safety and well-being of our students, our staff, and our community. It's our most important responsibility. Second is we need to have this continued partnership with our parents and the school district. And part of that partnership right now is just, hopefully getting your feedback, filling out the surveys, really coming up with the best possible model, because there's not one perfect model. Every one of them, especially in the hybrid model, has an impact on parents as we go. We talked about this when we went virtual in the spring. We believe that education is not only about academic growth. There's a huge social emotional component that is put in under great stress when you're in a virtual or remote model, and that this needs to be at the core of what we're trying to do for our young people. Also that, every student has kind of unique learning styles, and every family is different. And this goes with a little bit of criticism from other schools, but I believe it's important to give our parents input and choice in this. If you have a child with health concern, the autoimmune issues, you have family members that live you with autoimmune issues, and you decide for your personal decision right now is that remote is better, we need to provide that model for you. And that's the strategy and the approach that we've taken in creating our models. And then, lastly, my hope is that we find that this is an opportunity to improve what we do, that when we get to that time when there's a vaccine and we can get back to quote unquote normal, that normal doesn't look like it did when we left here in March of 2020, that we learn and grow and do better with some of the things that we're playing with right now to improve what we offer our kids. So those were the guiding principles behind everything. There's really kind of three models. I can move through these rather quickly. There's the full day model. Obviously in this model, we bring as many students as that feel they can come into the district. We'd implement all the cleaning and social sanitizing requirements. We limit student transitions, limit large group gatherings. We'd put up student trifold partitions throughout the district, and that's just a picture of one of those. So that would be at every student area. And room configurations with students, we'd spread them out as much as possible. But I think honesty is really important here. If we were to bring in all kids, I can tell you that we would not hit a 6-foot social distancing requirement, more like a 3 to 4 foot. And then we have the whole idea of, okay, is a mask on top of that? And those things are kind of yet to be decided. So that's the full day model as you kind of talk through. The remote learning model, this is where students, for whatever reason, either they've made that choice and they're completely remote, or we've had an outbreak in a building and we need to shut down an entire building and send them remote. In this model, we've invested in technology and in training. We know that there needs to be more synchronous and asynchronous education. So student to teacher interaction needs to increase in that model with a more regular schedule. So we've taken the necessary steps to prepare and improve that model as well. And then we've got the hybrid, which is obviously the most complex. That's where you're bringing in a portion of your students and due to an attempt to keep students further apart from a social distance perspective. As I said, I think we have over 30 iterations of these models, like in every other day, half days. We have looked at pros and cons, and we've landed on one that we think is best educationally. And now it's in time to really evaluate, is that the best model from a health and safety standpoint, and also, from a balancing what our parents need and what it does at home as well. And that's where we're at in this process. Just to clarify, in the survey, you will be given the opportunity to kind of respond to that half day model. So you may, if an every other day model is, something that you feel is much better for you, you'll have an opportunity to respond to that as well. And that data will inform where we go. So I've done a lot of talking. I'm going to turn it over to Mike and Jen to talk you through the models as they stand today. And again, please just remember, it says on the screen, these are drafts. And all of the data from surveys, all of the information we hear from you are going to drive kind of where the next iteration of these. And if I can make one promise, it's that they will look different by the time we roll out final schedules and models. So turn it over to Mike or Jen.
Sure. Thank you, Dr. Hunt. So the model we're looking at right now is Gurney's model. It's a half day, every day, 5 days a week model. So what you're seeing here is Cuyahoga County students coming in the morning. When those students get in, they'll have a 90-minute literacy block, a little bit of a break, and then a 60-minute math block before they head home. When they head home, the Cuyahoga County students will come in. So some of the things that we really like about this model, number one, in this one, there is no lunch and there's no recess, which are both very high risk activities and things to do. So by doing this model, we're avoiding that. Secondly, another big pro to this model is that students' retention of knowledge. So what they're able to do is we're seeing those students every single day. We're not spending a lot of time reviewing what we did on Monday all the way on Wednesday. We're doing, the teachers are getting more time to actually teach. As you look at this graphic, you'll see the encore block kind of moving throughout the week. So that's how it will go. 1 day a week, the students will have their traditional encore activities. And then when they're at home, what they'll be doing is they'll be working on things like science and social studies and working on their iReady pathways. These are typically activities that are more individualized and happen on their own. Teachers can then monitor and kind of adjust accordingly as we go. Dr. Hunt, will you move to the next slide that shows one of those schedules? So here's a sample student schedule for a Cuyahoga County student. Again, coming in the morning, getting that literacy and math block, and then heading home to work on science and social studies. And this schedule, I think encore is blocked, but it's on Friday. So during Friday, they'll go through their encore stuff. If we look at the intermediate school, it's got a similar model. Once again, I don't have the graphic rotating, but encore rotates between Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. Couple big things to note about the intermediate school. Number one, this is a big one. There's a time change there. So students would actually be arriving at the intermediate school at 7:20. It's about an hour earlier than what they're doing right now. But we needed to do that in order to accommodate transportation and things like that. At the intermediate school, the way it would work is, again, they will come in, Cuyahoga County students will come in the morning. They'll do 2 academic blocks focused on math and reading. While they're at home, though, they'll have face-to-face led lessons on science and social studies. So they'll be connecting to their teacher on a schedule for face-to-face work. And then they'll also have additional ELA stuff assigned at home. Dr. Hunt, will you go to the next slide as well so I can look at that schedule? So here's one for a Cuyahoga County student. So in this case, a student would wake up, they'll have a schedule in which they'll hop online and receive remote face-to-face instruction from science and social studies. They'll also work on their ELA. They'll get themselves ready, and they'll arrive at school at 11:20, get that in-person instruction for math and ELA. I think that covers all. I know we'll have time for questions at the end, but I think that covers the K-6 model pretty well. I'm going to turn it over to Mrs. Banco, and she'll talk about 7-12. Give me just 1 second.
Okay, I will talk through the middle school and the high school proposed schedules, but before I do, I want to just jump in and answer a couple of questions that were raised while Mike was discussing Gurney and the intermediate school. A couple of people expressed the concern about the importance of developing social emotional rapport with teachers and students and building that sense of community that we know to be so important at those early elementary levels. One of the reasons that the elementary design teams chose the half day, everyday model was for that exact reason, because they felt that by bringing in students every single day, it was much easier to quickly establish rapport, build relationships, and develop a sense of community. Kids will be in class every day with the same group of 10, 11 kids, and that will most closely resemble what they're used to under a traditional school model. So the alternative of, coming 2 full days, twice a week or 3 times a week, we felt like that was not going to allow us to establish that relationship and those, that important sense of community as quickly. The other question about encores being in person, that's something that we went round and round about. On one hand, we thought, do we prioritize literacy and math instruction and put all Encore instruction remote? But again, those are areas where for students, there's a lot of social emotional development embedded into those content areas. So we saw value in still providing that in-person instruction for Encores during the school week. The other thing that we considered was there are ways to provide PE instruction, for example, outside. And I think that we will see teachers looking to take every advantage of the opportunity to teach in an open air classroom as much as they possibly can. The other thing that the Encore instruction does is it allows our teachers to continue to have built-in grade level planning time, which is going to be more important than ever as we're trying to coordinate the instruction of students both in the classroom as well as in the home setting. So that rotating Encore day allows our grade level teams to continue to meet. Okay, now jumping into the middle school and the high school. So the middle school and the high school operate on a very similar schedule. In case you didn't know, we have shared staff members that work at both buildings. So it's always important that those buildings align their schedules as much as possible. So in each case, if I talk specifically about the middle school, we are having students attend 5 days a week for a half of a day. When they're not in person, they are at home doing virtual instruction with their teacher. So as you can see, a typical middle schooler has 8 periods in their day. So they will come to each of their classes one time in person during either the morning or the afternoon. And then they will also tune into that class one time a week remotely. In terms of how much time will a child spend in a class in that remote learning environment, you'll note that the class periods are 75 minutes long. They will not necessarily be online for that entire 75 minutes. So some of the professional development that will occur with teachers will be how to manage the 10 or 12 students that are in your classroom live, as well as the students who are tuning in from home. And someone raised a question about that, and that takes a certain level of teaching skill, and you're right. I mean, that is what we will focus our time on once we know our model to help support teachers. I think there was a comment about needing a teacher's aide in the classroom, and we agree that if you're managing both environments, that is a lot to put on one teacher. So we've already discussed options of how to use our educational aides in a different way to support both of those environments at the same time. You'll note in the middle school model, Wednesday is a flexible day. This allows us to respond kind of on a week-to-week basis to what students' needs are educationally. So we can do flexible grouping for content area instructions. We can spend extra time in a science lab. We can build in some of those additional social emotional curriculum pieces that typically happen within the middle school day. If you want to flip, Bob, to the next slide. Here's a sample schedule for a Cuyahoga County student in terms of when they would be in school and when they would be at home. You see that in the afternoon, there are set times that they will be logging in for their classes. And I just want to reiterate too that at the secondary level, middle school and high school, we have the flexibility to keep our special education students or students who have a high amount of intervention built into their day. We can keep them all day to ensure that we can provide those services to them. Okay, if you move on to the high school. Okay, at the high school level, again, it's very similar to the middle school. Perhaps the biggest difference is that rather than coming 5 days a week for a half a day, they would come 4 days a week. This would then allow Wednesday to be a full virtual or remote learning day for all students. They continue to build Tiger Period into their schedule, which gives students and teachers flexibility in getting together to review content, do test prep. It is a time when we can still continue to provide class meetings, deliver assembly information, and continue to meet students where they are academically. And I think that's it. The next slide will show the simple high school schedule.
with the high school, the plan would be for the campus to be open, meaning that students would be able to come and go only for when they need to be in the building. So for example, if you take this sample student on Thursday, or I'm sorry, let's look at on Tuesday, they have biology in person at 1:35, so they would be able to come in just for biology and leave when it's open. So having students only be on campus when they need to be for class, again, decreases the number of people around, which helps with the social distancing requirements. Okay, I think that's it.
Thanks, Jen. Just a couple of things to note here that are important. One, I want to highlight one of the most significant changes is the arrival time in intermediate school. I think Mr. Doherty already mentioned that. The other major implication of this model for consideration and feedback from parents is that to pull off the midday transportation runs, we would likely not offer transportation at the 9 through 12 level. Again, one of the important questions on the survey is, will you leverage transportation in respond to specific models in the survey as well? But that's a big point to So a couple of things, advantages to the AM PM, eliminates lunch and recess, increased instructional time at the elementary level, more repetition and frequency of instruction at the elementary level. Time can be provided for those students with need intervention or special education services, as well as that opportunity to build relationships with peers and teachers. If you kind of think, holistically through our K-12 model, you see more freedom, I guess, or more inclusion of online learning or remote learning at the secondary level as compared to the elementary. I think we, in going through what we did with our elementary students, we really felt the more we can keep them face to face, the better, as they just don't have that level of independence that our secondary students have. So just next steps in our work, and then we'll get to some of the questions in the chat and open it up. Obviously, we talked about surveying our parents to get a very good understanding of kind of where each of these models fall and get some very specific feedback. We'll continue to discuss any calendar modifications for the opening of school. We'll present a recommendation for the Board of Education to review, hopefully, towards the end of July. We'll continue to prepare our facilities, transportation, and student schedules for the opening of school. And I think, one of the things we do need to acknowledge is we feel like we've got some more work to do on the secondary model. We're not sure it's where it needs to be. We wanted to share this with you. We feel pretty solid on the elementary side, but I think we have some further work to do on the secondary model, and full disclosure, just in terms of amount of instructional time and things of that nature. So that really gives you kind of an overview of where we stand. Hopefully you kind of understand why we are where we're at in terms of getting guidance from the state and some of the challenges that we face. As I said, I sense a loosening of the requirements of 6 feet, maybe coming out of Columbus. Certainly, if you look up some of these American Academy of Pediatrics studies, there's some suggestion that in addition to shielding, maybe that could be limited. There's a lot of things that play into this. Obviously, we need to work with our teachers on their safety from a work condition standpoint. And we also need to, we're working with insurance companies to see, make sure that we meet, the requirements of our insurance as well. So there's a lot of levels to what really drives the final decision, and really your input is one of the most important. So I appreciate everyone taking the time to learn about where we're at, and encourage you to fill the survey out. So Mike, Jen, if you want to kind of scroll through some questions, I don't have the chat up, so I'm going to rely on you to ask them. And then we'll open it up a little bit.
So Bob, one of the questions raised was whether there are any advantages to taking the college approach of being off after Thanksgiving. Do you want to talk about that?
We did not spend a ton of time on that. So I think I would believe the rationale about that is it kind of coincides with flu season, the normal flu season, and they see a real uptick in that. I think a lot of that is built on kind of the college model. Let's not send them, send all these students back into their home, areas where they might get the virus and bring them back. From our standpoint, when we looked at procurement of some of our PPE and things that we needed, August, early August would have been a real challenge for us. So that really kind of made that dead in the water.
Hey, Bob. Hold on. Bob, I'm going to take one real quick. Somebody asked if there's any consideration given to the communication of assignments, due dates, et cetera, to parents, or will parents need to comb through student emails and online class blocks? That is something that we have spent a lot of time looking at from the technology side. I can tell you that we're still working out what that would look like, but that is definitely a major part of our plan once we get a model in place. The goal and focus here will be to make sure that it's very easy for both parents and students to find all assignments, find due dates, and not be jumping all over the place. We heard that loud and clear from the survey that happened in May. So just know that that is something that we are working on, and we will have much clearer expectations on what that will look like and how that will go. Bob, another one, I'm just going to read off this one out loud. It says, the high school schedule accounted for instruction for 4 periods per day. Will there also be virtual expectations for the classes not on the schedule for that day? Or is the expectation that any new instruction or assignments are only for the 4 listed periods?
So if I think I understand this correctly, the question that is, those students would be required to be online as well. So they would be live in the classroom. I think Jen mentioned this, probably not sitting in front of their computer live for 75 minutes. This is where teachers have to really be creative in terms of, what elements do I need to, from a direct instruction standpoint, need to provide to all of the students. I can either then break kids into groups, whether that be Zoom groups in classrooms virtually, or would that be in the room, or I can let those virtual students go to do some work, and I'll see them in the next class. But there would be an expectation that they are tuning in when they're at home.
There's another question that came in, Dr. Hahn. It says, what is the plan around student athletes returning to school after games where social distancing is not an option? Basketball, football, soccer, et cetera. Are any precautions going to be taken?
Yeah, so this question is really hitting on, one of the, frustrations I would have is the inconsistency in what's being allowed and what's not being allowed. It seems like the Ohio High School Athletic Association is ahead of the NFL in wanting to start football. These are issues, I'll just be honest with you, are in kind of phase 2 of what we need to work on. And that's our response plans. What happens when something happens within your district. We've had some of the initial conversations, some of the guidance has that information, but we really need to vet that out. And, in fact, I've had a couple of conversations with local health professionals that might be able to help us in that. Well, by the time we get to school, we want really clear plans. So everyone knows that if we have a case, which we likely will have probably asymptomatic kids come in day 1, if we have an outbreak that we know about, what is that going to look like? What are the processes? What are the systems? Certainly, we're going to be encouraging you as parents to do, daily fever checks. Keep your students home. Don't put others at risk. There's going to be a responsibility on us all, and we need to take that very, very serious. So we can keep students in school as long as possible without having to go remote. So we have kind of parent information that will have to come out as we all need to be part of kind of trying to protect our kids in this.
Hey, Dr. Hunter, another question that has come in a couple of times is, do we intend to rotate the schedule to allow Geauga students to attend in the morning instead of Cuyahoga students?
We haven't had that conversation. I think we approached this as trying to bring as much consistency for parents as possible so they can make whatever arrangements they need to make. So we did not consider that or have conversation around flipping those up.
Another one for you. The incoming second grade is larger than normal. So with the reduction of a teacher for that grade, how will the student to teacher ratio look with the hybrid model with respect to social distancing?
So with a hybrid model at 50% of students in, we believe that we can get between 10 and 14 kids in a classroom, which would not impact, second grade specifically. That is a little higher than some of the other grades from an elementary perspective. We've got larger grades in our district than that grade, but we believe, we've actually run, we've set up classrooms. We've gone through the measurements. Again, I think that number between 10 and 14 would mean that half of the kids can be brought in. And you should know we've gone through the process of splitting up class lists, so it's an equal number of Geauga and Cuyahoga County kids in classes in our elementaries already. So that work has been done.
I've got a two-parter here for you. First one, there's a concern that by doing the split by county, by Geauga and Cuyahoga, that we're going to be dividing friend groups that already have that are already under a lot of social emotional pressure. The question was, did we work with any students on the decision and kind of why we decided to go by county? If you want to touch on that.
Yeah, and if I didn't say this earlier, I'll restate it. There's no hybrid model that's perfect. They all have pressure and pain points. A large part of the split is honestly just logistics of being able to pull off transportation. So, for us to bring in, students, half of our students and include the entire community just makes it impractical to provide transportation with the number of buses and drivers that would need to be added. So a lot of the division from Geauga and Cuyahoga was more about the feasibility of being able to pull off the transportation side than it was anything else.
And then will all the classes at the high school still continue to be offered in the hybrid model?
The answer to that is yes, with a few caveats. We're not sure where band is going to kind of play out. We're going through the process right now of, there's a band camp at the end of July. We're going to put a proposal into the health department. So band is one that could look very different. Choir, the same thing, in terms of, projecting, your voice. Our intention is to offer all courses, but I think there may be some courses that have to look a little different.
Is the planning team considering using spaces such as gyms, cafeterias, and auditoriums for classrooms to maximize the amount of kids that want to come back for traditional in-person instruction?
So I would say we're planning to offer our encores, so those spaces would be utilized. The other thing we're going to, we have to, be aware of, there may be students in the high school that, have a class, or transport in early in the afternoon, maybe have a class and they have a larger break. So those larger areas are going to be places and spaces that students can go. We certainly at the secondary level, some classes are of larger class sizes. We would use some of those areas to spread out as well. So that's how I would answer that. I would imagine that our teachers will, as we kind of push into making final decisions, we may start to push into some of those spaces for sure. But we did, if we wrestled with the model of, do you keep your secondary more virtual and try to bring all your elementary kids in every single day and spread them out through the district? That's feasible to do, but then it becomes a staffing concern of having enough bodies to actually be with students. I know, one of the models I think Beechwood, was considering was that, where they'll have maybe a gym teacher that'll teach a second grade class. So we did not go down that road, but certainly, as we continue to evolve, things may change here.
In the high school, math classes typically have the students divided into teams for group work. Is the math curriculum still going to be using this group work model?
So that's a big component of CPM. I honestly, that grouping into the level of grouping, that will have to change. The curriculum, the pace, the things that are taught, that will not change. But I think the methodology, I would not be being transparent if I said the methodology will certainly have to be modified.
I think between the three of us, have answered all the questions that I've seen come through. We've got just a couple minutes left. If anybody wants to raise their hand, we could take direct questions that way. I'm not seeing any hands. Oh, wait, there we go. Hang on one sec. Oh, nope. Maybe not. Oh, yep. All right, go ahead.
Hi, I was just wondering with the half day schedule or the morning and afternoon schedule, what happens if you're, I mean, because it's going to be the same teacher with the Cuyahoga County kids in the morning and the Geauga kids in the afternoon. I mean, isn't there going to be a spread of the virus that way with the teacher interacting with all students every day? Is that going to be an issue, or are there going to be different teachers in the classroom?
No, it would be the same teachers, but if we were to bring all students in every day, they would be exposed to all of those students as well. So I think the risk there is the same.
And there'll be cleaning that happens in between that transition as well. Lee, you also had a question. I'm gonna go for it.
Yeah. What are we doing as far as a community of, are we just kind of going to do a pledge that if our kids are fever or have a cold or anything, that they stay home? Because with all due respect, I know this is very hard on everybody, and ideally, you know, we would go back to things a year ago and everyone would be able to go to school. But I do know instances where, you know, Susan comes to school and says, oh yeah, I threw up this morning, but mom gave me some Tylenol and told me to go ahead and go to school. And with there only being a 4-hour chunk at some of the campuses, you know, if somebody took Tylenol, they might not have a fever during that time. I mean, are we depending on everybody to just pull together as a community and be honest? I mean, in a perfect world, that would be, you know, there would be no cause for asking a question like that. But I do know that times are hard for everybody, and ideally everyone would like to go back to class. And sometimes, you know, if kids are sick and you don't realize it, and what's the protocol for that if we're not doing temperature check at school?
So one of the things with guidance is temperature checking. So that's one of the things that's kind of hanging out there. We haven't invested in additional thermometers, and we'll kind of consider that guidance when it comes in. I think, but as I mentioned previously, we absolutely are going to have to count on each other to be aware that the decisions we make in our homes could very well impact other students and other parents. So we are preparing rooms within the district where we'd isolate students and or staff that may, you know, demonstrate a fever or symptoms, and we are preparing those protocols. But there absolutely is a level of parents needing to understand the decisions they make have implications well beyond their child, and it's going to be really important that we articulate that and send that message very strongly.
Bob, I've got one last question from Amy Lynn. Amy Lynn, go ahead.
Hi, thank you. Hi, Dr. Hunt. I just want to start by saying you guys are doing an amazing job. So thank you, all of you, your team, your staff, everyone. But my next question is, with the delay in Governor DeWine's announcement of guidelines, what, and you may have said this earlier about it, what does your timeline look like after you kind of put the survey out there next week? And then I know you have a Board of Education meeting. Do you have a timeline in your head of when you think these decisions could or possibly could be made?
Yeah, so I'll start with my original timeline, which is gone, but in perspective on what I'd like to achieve moving forward. So originally we anticipated guidance on June 1st. I kind of laid out a timeline that allowed our staff to work with the models, to get parent feedback, and hopefully by end of June at that first July meeting, say, okay, here's our model for our parents. I think now everything is delayed about a month. My hope is that we would be able to accomplish the necessary work during July, and that last week of July where we almost would have kind of an online registration where you pick your model, because that data is really important to what we can offer. So my goal is to continue to communicate, both in writing and maybe a couple of these community forums, so people kind of have a sense of where things are going along the way. But I understand a sense of urgency, especially from a childcare perspective, that people need to know, and that's weighing heavily. I just don't want to rush and make decisions that aren't best based on the right information. So we're going to do it as quickly as possible, but I think I'm going to need most of July to get this work done.
Thank you.
We are a little past time. Dr. Hunt, if you wanted to wrap everything up.
Sure. I just want to thank everyone, and certainly I've gotten great feedback. Somebody sent me some feedback regarding transportation and how the way we were doing it had an implication on their older child being able to help out. So please don't feel shy, embarrassed to send your concerns and or feedback regarding these models. It only helps. I think we've mentioned the survey about 50 times in each of these community forums. I really need a wide response and as much feedback as possible. So not only you filling it out for your children, but also encouraging everyone around you to fill it out. The numbers in terms of transportation and who needs it and who doesn't. The numbers in terms of who kind of has made the decision, I'm just not comfortable, we're going to be remote. All of those really will drive kind of the final answer and the final model that we end up going with in August. So I can't stress that enough. And we are very, very appreciative of the amount of feedback we've gotten, because it's only going to lead us to a better place. So I greatly appreciate everyone's input. We did a similar presentation last week, but the questions were different. The feedback was different. So we learn a little bit each time. We're going to do another one of these at 5 o'clock this afternoon. So if you didn't get enough already, you can feel free to tune into that one as well. So I appreciate very much all that you're doing to help the school district and get to the other side of this. So thank you very much. I also want to recognize and thank Mike, Jen, administrators, and all of our teaching staff that has contributed in getting us this far as well. All right.